All right, so day number 2, we are looking at the digestive system physiology. We really want to dive into catabolism and understand that. So our objectives today is kind of understand the individual little organs of our digestive system, and then we can understand the process by which materials are going to actually get through our digestive tract. That's the thing about the digestive system, right? Is we got to be able to, it's basically this amazing system that allows us to get stuff from the outside environment into our bodies directly. And actually pass into our bloodstream. So the world's best disassembling system, I guess, is the best way to describe your digestive tract. So we'll talk about the anatomy and how it of the stomach and how it plays a role in the whole digestion process. We will talk about your small intestine. We're going to work our way through our large intestine. Then we're going to get into our accessory organs like the pancreas and your gallbladder. And then we'll talk a lot about your liver. That's another really big important one. And then eventually we will talk a little bit about nutrients at the very end of this lesson. We kind of break just a few things down at the end. So again, if you look at like this whole anabolic versus catabolic process, right? We've got to talk about like how our digestive system is sort of carrying this all out. So we're going to go ahead and go through like a little crash course video here that is going to kind of break down, no pun intended, our digestive system for us and make a little bit more sense. Because as we're looking at it, we want to understand how we can take like a, piece of pizza, which is obviously way too big to just fit into our bloodstream. How do we get that piece of pizza into our blood? Because that's really what we're talking about. So actually need digestive system. That's the one we want. And there we go. Actually, you know what? I just realized this is the wrong one. I want this one.
Oh, hi.
I want this crash course. This is actually this is the first crash course video. This is crash course anatomy, not crash course physiology. But all right, here we go. This one, by the way, this is going to get real gross real quick. Fair warning.
I hope you don't mind that I'm eating. This is actually just my first course. For my birthday, the writers wrote me a script where I just get to eat the whole time. And I can't think of a better way to demonstrate the workings of the digestive system, the series of hollow organs that we use to break down and process nutrients and energy we need to function. Though, wait a second. If I remember correctly, digestion is actually pretty freaking disgusting. So maybe I shouldn't be eating right now. But whatever. Waiter! The digestive system is so fundamental that it's basically step number 1 in the guide to how to make an animal. You probably remember that during the embryonic development of most animals, the digestive tract is the very first thing that forms. When the blastula, that little wad of cells that we all used to be, turns into a little wad of cells with a tube running through it, that tube is your digestive system. And pretty much every animal has a digestive system of some kind, but they're not all alike. Far from it. In fact, digestive tracts are specially adapted to animals' feeding behavior and diet. For instance, a housefly eats mostly liquid or very finely granulated food, but before it does that, it's gotta puke its digestive juices all over its lunch and then let them digest it for a while before it sucks it up into its mouth. If we did it like that, first dates would be less common. Most vertebrates put food in one end of the tube and our digestive system processes it, and then it gets rid of the waste out the other end of the tube. No muss, no fuss. Well, actually, there's a little bit of muss at the end, you may have noticed. But the beauty of it is that this whole process is run by our autonomic nervous system, so we don't have to think about it until maybe the very last step when we're in traffic and just had 2 cups of coffee and a bran muffin. Then we have to think about it a little bit. Among vertebrates, the digestive tract might be short or long or have organs that do different things depending on what its feeding habits are. For instance, dogs are mostly carnivores and also scavengers. They mostly eat meat, but sometimes that meat's been dead for a while. So the dog's digestive system has developed to take food in, absorb as many nutrients as possible, and then deposit it on somebody's lawn all in a period of about 6 hours. Dogs have an extremely short digestive tract because if you're in the habit of eating rotten meat, you'd better be able to digest it fast. If you don't, the bad bacteria that's probably living on that armadillo carcass is going to take up residence in your gut and put you in a world of hurt. Cows, on the other hand, take a very, very, very long time to digest their food, around 80 hours, because they have to process plants, mostly grass. Grass has a ton of cellulose in it, and evolution has yet to produce an animal that can manufacture a stomach acid or enzyme tough enough to break down cellulose. So cows have microorganisms in their guts that break down the cellulose for them. This process takes a 4-chambered stomach, each one with a slightly different microecology, and a lot of cud chewing, or regurgitating and rechewing of grass, before it passes all the way through. So nature is full of crazy digestion stories, and I honestly wish that I had time to tell them all. But let's focus on human digestion from now on, mostly because you're probably a human, we don't assume anything here, and you'll be wanting to know how your body does all this stuff. And 2, humans actually have a pretty good all-purpose digestive system. We're omnivores, after all. We eat plants and meat, so our systems are generalized to handle all kinds of stuff. Like most animals, humans have a bunch of different acids and enzymes in our digestive tract that break down food so that it can be absorbed and used by our bodies. But the secret to successful digestion is maximizing surface area, in more than one way, actually. The first way we maximize surface area is on the food itself. So say I take a bite out of this apple. Right now, it's like an apple boulder sitting there in my mouth. I got enzymes in my saliva that immediately start breaking it down, like the outsides of the boulder. As I swallow this chunk whole right now, not only would it hurt like heck, the rest of my digestive system would have a really hard time dealing with it because most of the enzymes and acids would have the same difficulty working all the way through this big solid hunk. But when I use my awesome teeth to chew up this hunk of apple, suddenly there's double, triple, quadruple the surface area on the food. I'm making up apple gravel from the apple boulder. Maybe even apple sand. For humans, chewing is key because breaking down our food into smaller and smaller bits allows enzymes and acids to get at them. And after our teeth have made the pieces small enough, the chemicals break them down further until they're fine enough for our bodies to absorb nutrients from them. But it's not just the surface area of the food that's important. The surface area of the digestive system is key to the whole process as well. Last time I talked about how we have a whole bunch of surface area in our lungs to absorb tons of oxygen all at once. Well, our digestive system works in much the same way. Most of the absorption of nutrients happens in our small intestines, and the length of the average human adult's small intestine is about 7 meters. Plus, inside our small intestines there are a bunch of little folds and little absorbing fibers with absorbing fibers on them, and no, I didn't misspeak, the fibers have fibers. That's how hard our intestines work to increase their surface area. Last episode I was all impressed that lungs have a total surface area of 75 square meters. Well, the small intestine has a surface area of 250 square meters. Ugh, it's kind of gross. I wouldn't want to see it spread out over a tennis court or anything. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Digestion does not start at the small intestine, people. It starts at the mouth. Now, as you can see, this hot pocket is surrounded by some kind of bread, if you can call it that. Bread is a starch which breaks down into glucose. When I start gnawing on a piece of bread, look at the outside here, so it's mostly bread. The glands in my mouth start secreting saliva, which contains salivary amylase, an enzyme designed to break down starch into glucose. The more I chew, the more amylase will get to all the different sides of the bread, and that's why the more you chew bread, the sweeter it tastes. Amylase doesn't really do much to the meat of the cheese in this thing. I've got other enzymes and acids that are gonna work on them later on in the system, but I am gonna chew all that stuff up real good right now so that those other enzymes can do their jobs later. I'm gonna swallow all this. So now the masticated hot pocket has passed down my pharynx or throat and into my esophagus, which leads to my stomach. There's actually this little cool flap of tissue called the epiglottis that blocks the trachea when I swallow so that the food doesn't end up in my respiratory system. So this ball of food that I just swallowed actually has a scientific name. It's called a bolus, and it rides a kind of wave of muscle action down the esophagus into the stomach. This wave-like contraction of the smooth muscles around the tube of the esophagus is called peristalsis, and it's basically how most of the movement in your digestive system is accomplished. Now, my Hot Pocket bolus is in my stomach now, which is where the food really starts getting manhandled. The stomach basically takes a scorched earth approach to digestion. It's not messing around. It's like a churning cement mixture that can contract and expand with these big accordion-like folds of muscle called rugae. Your stomach's job is to turn everything over and over, smushing and mixing all the pieces up with its cocktail of acids and enzymes called gastric juice. Gastric juice is mainly made up of hydrochloric acid, an enzyme called pepsin, and some mucus and water. Hydrochloric acid has a pH of about 1, which is strong enough that if you got it on your hand, it would give you a chemical burn, so the acid breaks things down and hopefully kills most of the bacteria that you might find on your food. And the pepsin starts breaking down proteins into amino acids. Now that mucus is important. It's there to protect your stomach so that it doesn't, digest itself. When you don't have enough of that mucus, you get peptic ulcers, which happen when your stomach lining comes in direct contact with your stomach acid. And the water's just in there to make everything all soupy, because what you want by the time your food leaves your stomach is chyme, which is a kind of liquidy slop that you might be familiar with from the last time you had a stomach virus. You knew this conversation was going to have to get a little bit gross, and I didn't want to bring diarrhea into it too much because, I've been eating. But when something bad is going on in your digestive tract, your body doesn't worry too much about absorbing nutrients. It just wants to get the chyme out of there. So chyme is what you see when you get the picture. Anyway, there's a little valve or sphincter between the stomach and the small intestine that regulates how much chyme gets into the small intestine and when it gets in there. The very beginning of the small intestine is called the duodenum. This is where a lot of the small intestine action happens, by which I mean lots of things get absorbed and also secreted, like bicarbonate, which neutralizes the gastric acid before it goes any further. Now, the coolness of the small intestine can't be overstated. It's ground zero for cellular exchange of nutrients and the breakdown of fats. And again, the reason it's so good at absorbing is because all of the surface area it's got going on. A lot of that surface area comes from the fact that despite its name, your small intestine is frickin' long. In a human, it can range anywhere from 4.5 to 10.5 meters. But that's not all. The whole inside is lined with epithelial tissue that has tons of ridges and folds in it. Surface area to the max. And on those ridges and folds are these little hair-like fibers of flesh called villi. Each villus has capillaries on it so that it can absorb nutrients. And get this, each villus, which is only like half a millimeter long, is covered in teeny tiny little microvilli, providing even more surface area. In fact, apparently, the small intestine has a texture kind of like velvet, which is, oh, great, now I eat the milkshake? Fantastic. Okay. So another thing the small intestine does with the help of its friend the gallbladder is break down fatty stuff, like this milkshake. Near the top of your small intestine is a little pipe where bile salts manufactured by the liver and stored by the gallbladder are squirted out into the small intestine. Bile works like dish detergent on a pan you just fried something in. It's an emulsifier. It takes hydrophobic fat molecules and breaks them up into fatty acids and monoglycerides, which can be absorbed by all that epithelial tissue. I've never had Chunky Monkey before. Nuts. After your food passes through those yards and yards of small intestine, the chyme goes through another sphincter and enters the cecum, the beginning of the large intestine. The large intestine's job is to remove most of the water and bile salts from the chyme so you don't have constant diarrhea, so you can thank it for that. It's called large because it's wider than the small intestine, but it's not nearly as long. It's basically just a 1.5 meter victory lap around the outside of the small intestine, and then it calls it good. Also, should mention, at the end of the cecum there's a little tube where the appendix comes in. For a long time we thought that the appendix was a worthless vestigial structure that we used to need at some point in our evolution but didn't need anymore. However, recent studies are finding that the purpose of the appendix in modern humans is probably to act as a safe house for all the good bacteria you need to help you digest your food. If you get a virus or food poisoning or something and all your digestive systems say, "Get it all out of me!" the appendix has a little sample of your gut bacteria that it spits out to help you recolonize after your illness. So I think you're probably familiar with the final step in the digestive system. That's the pooping. Your food can spend as long as 3 days in your digestive tract, and a lot of that time is spent in the large intestine, mostly reabsorbing the excess water from the chyme and prepping your poo for its great entrance into the world. When it's done, it passes through everybody's favorite sphincters, the anal sphincters. There are 2 of them, and out in the world to live its own life. And that's the end of our little tale here that begins with the Hot Pocket. I hope you join us next time for more disgustingness as we discuss the details of the excretory system. Until then, Bon appetit. Thank you for watching this episode of Crash Course Biology. If you want to go back and review anything, table of contents, just click on it. Thanks, of course, to everybody who helped put this episode together. If you have questions for us, please leave them in the comments below or on Facebook or Twitter, and our team of experts will attempt to answer. Goodbye.
Yeah, we're not watching that next video. So that is kind of an overview of everywhere we're headed today. We're going to get through all of those organs. So hopefully, we get some of those animations to kind of see, because like, obviously sometimes visualizing this stuff can be some of the hardest part of studying physiology, right? I think that's why like ATP production is so difficult to understand, is it's like, we just don't get to see it, we have to kind of rely on diagrams and stuff. So all right, so we are looking at the process of digestion. So when I, what am I talking about when I say digestion? Well, this is going to be the process of both mechanical and also chemical breakdown. So your first step in digestion is right when your food enters your mouth and you start chewing, right? Like your teeth are these like really hard little, this really hard material that's able to kind of bust up food and break it up into individual little tiny pieces. That is already part of digestion, right? You're taking something that's very big and complex and you're busting up into something that is smaller and simpler. And if you do that well enough, when it passes into your stomach acid, it'll have a very easy time going through chemical breakdown. And the chemical breakdown will be your digestive enzymes and juices, busting up things on a chemical level and dissolving things until, they are small enough to actually pass into your actual bloodstream. So we've got major divisions in the digestive system. When we're talking about digestive system, yes, we are talking about digestion, obviously, but we're also talking about absorption, which is really important. We need to be able to, once we break it down, we need to get it into our body, right? And so like, that's where we're going to have like a lot of accessory organs that make it a lot easier to further break stuff down until it's small enough to just passively work its way right into the inside of us. So as we're looking at the digestive system, right, we're going to go ahead and title this the system that is in the body that's responsible for mechanical breakdown, such as chewing, and chemical breakdown, such as, stomach acid, breakdown of foods, and the absorption of those nutrients by our cells. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with ingestion. That's the process of putting something in your mouth hole. Then we're going to go into propulsion, which is moving it through our digestive tract. So we'll start with swallowing and continue with all the little contractions that it makes to move the food around. Mechanical processing, which is also starting in the mouth during like the process of like chewing stuff up. Digestion itself, which is the chemical breakdown of things. And then your digestive tract has to also be able to secrete materials in that make digestion better. And it has to be able to absorb those nutrients. And finally, it needs to be able to get rid of waste products. So if we are separating out our digestive tract into various different pieces, first thing we're going to see is what's called your, we're going to talk about how it's your alimentary canal, right? When I say your digestive tract or what your digestive system, it's a tract in the same way that, like train tracks, like it's a thing that something travels down, right? This is with something that food travels down. So we call it a canal, right? It's the alimentary canal. It's this 8-meter long tube that passes through your entire body. So this is what's kind of funny. We're all basically human donuts, like if you actually think about it, like that's one thing that people don't really understand about in your respiratory system is the same arrangement, by the way. But one of the things that people struggle to understand with respiration and digestion is that you are exposing the inside parts of you to the outside part of the world. And that's how we're actually absorbing that stuff in, right? Like if you were to look at, if we look at a donut here, if you were to put something in the center hole of this, if you put something in the center hole of this donut, you wouldn't say that it's in the donut, right? Well, that's where food is sitting. It's just kind of sitting in this empty hole that's not really inside you. It's just It's outside you that happens to be running through you, if that makes sense. You know, like something is in my mouth, like if I was just holding it there, right, I wouldn't say that that's in my body, right? I would say that it's actually outside my body until it passes into my bloodstream. Once it passes into my bloodstream, it becomes what we call systemic. And when it's systemic, that's actually now like part of you. And once something gets in there, it's really hard to get it out, which is a good thing. But like, you know, we actually need to get something to go into this hole and then pass through those walls into the inside parts of us. So we're all human donuts in the end. So the digestive, the alimentary canal is gonna, this, if you were to stretch it all out and lay it all, it kind of looks like this, right? You can see like this is the inner hole. This is the tube that everything's running through, right? And so it starts in the mouth here and then goes into the stomach, works its way through the small intestine, and then eventually into the large intestine before it makes its way, you know, it's gone through the tunnel and out the other side. So we're going to go ahead and break this down by processes first. So we're going to go ahead and start with, we're going to start in with ingestion and digestion. So ingestion, we're talking about like, you know, getting something into the body. We're talking about like, you know, putting it into our mouth, right? And this is actually where the first step of digestion takes place. The second you put something into your mouth, you actually start both mechanically and chemically breaking it down. Like, don't do this because it's real nasty after a while. But if you were to take like a cracker or like a piece of bread, something that's like fairly rich in carbohydrates, like maybe like a pretzel piece or something like that, and put it in your mouth and don't chew it, and you just let it sit there and kind of mix with all your spit and saliva and stuff, it would actually start to eventually taste kind of sweet. The sweetness factor would actually kind of go up in that food. Now, the grossness factor is also going up slowly over time. So when I say it's sweeter, it is, but it's not like a good sweet. It's not gonna taste like sugar, but it's gonna taste like sugary, I guess is a better way to put it. Like it doesn't taste like, it's not like you're putting sugar in your mouth or anything, but like it tastes a little bit better. And so it gets a little sweeter in a weird way. And the reason that's happening is because remember, carbohydrates are these big, long, super complicated chains, right? We talked about that yesterday, right? If we said a chain of glucose, you know, we look at a whole bunch of glucose molecules all linked together. Polysaccharide. There we go. Oh, actually, oh, love that one. Actually, I'm going to copy this one. This is perfect. So we look at like this little like picture here, right? Each of these is an individual little sugar molecule, right? This is a sugar molecule right here. And so if I break that off, and there's a sugar molecule right here, and break that one off. Now, obviously, this would take water, right? I need to be able to like shove H2O in between these molecules to actually break them off. I'm just kind of breaking them without adding that, but I don't want to have to draw a whole bunch of H's and O's today. But there we go. Right now, I've kind of busted up this big complicated thing. You know, it used to look like this, where it was this big, long, complicated chain. And now I broke it into individual little pieces, right? Now, these individual pieces, they're small enough, they can go into my bloodstream. And that's why we're digesting stuff. This process starts at the mouth. This actually happens in your saliva before you even start chewing. So here's the thing though, your mouth is pretty good at breaking stuff down. Like it's not bad at it, but it's not as good at it as like the rest of your digestive tract is. So it can break down carbohydrates, but only like a little bit. And it does that thanks to your saliva. Right. So digestion is the process of breaking down stuff into their individual components. It happens mechanically and chemically. So in the mouth, when you start chewing, that's mechanical processing, right? You're taking something and you're breaking it into individual little tiny pieces. Then it's also mixing with your saliva, and your saliva is not just like water. You know, your spit is slightly different. It actually is full of these little enzymes. So you remember we talked about enzymes yesterday? They're the guys that are responsible for kicking off chemical reactions. They're kind of like the key, the ignition to your car, right? They kind of start firing things up. So your body produces this little enzyme in your spit here called salivary amylase. Okay, and salivary amylase is produced by your salivary glands. These little glands like that live right here. There's some in your cheeks. There's some underneath, deep in your chin. There's one directly underneeth your tongue. Lecture's life. You poke down with your tongue, you get that big, like, it squirts out that saliva there, right? So saliva is really great because it does make it very easy for us to break stuff down, right? It does make it easier for us to like get stuff in and chew, like we've all run out of spit if we've been eating something that's like, really like dry. We used to in high school, we would try to like, there was like a thing that we saw online. It was like, nobody can eat 6 crackers in under a minute. And I was like, that's gotta be, there's no way that's true. And like, sure enough, like you just, after like cracker number 4, it's like you have no spit left. And it's like, oh, this is actually very hard. But like that's because we kind of run out of saliva there. So we need to be able to like create new saliva, right? We need to be able to like continually secrete this stuff in. And so this is under the control of what we call our parasympathetic nervous system. It is part of your autonomic nervous system, which means you have no control over it, which is kind of fun. Parasympathetic is something that sort of triggers the release of saliva there. So if I even just, we're kind of talking about saliva, you may have become a little bit more aware of your spit while I've been talking about this, and you might be noticing that your mouth's watering a little. But we can make that happen even more autonomically without you really manually controlling it. If I were to ask you to imagine you're eating the greasiest, saltiest, but most delicious piece of pizza in the world, and it's like really just like lovely, something that's like, it really, you're just going to need like, all this, like the delicious, like little salt crystals and like grease crystals and stuff. Like the more you imagine your favorite slice of pizza on the planet, chances are your mouth's watering a little bit right now if you're thinking about it hard enough. And that is your autonomic system. So you don't really have any control over that. Naturally bringing food in will naturally produce saliva. What is saliva? Like I said, it's not just water. It is this specialized chemical. It's this enzyme, right? And so that enzyme is called salivary amylase, and it's produced by your salivary glands. And what it does is it breaks complex carbohydrates into, we call these disaccharides. So double sugar molecules. So we need to be able to get this big, complicated carbohydrate into our bloodstream, right? We want every one of these glucose molecules so I can use it to produce ATP, right? So we need to be able to break this down. Like I said, we need to be able to come here and just kind of split that one off, and we need to split that one off and split this one off, right? And split this one apart, right? That's what we need to have happen in digestion in general. But we got to be able to have different chemicals that are going to help us break that down. Salivary amylase is the first one. Now, it's really good at breaking down carbohydrates, but it's not good enough to break them all the way into individual sugars. What it actually does is it splits them into disaccharides. So it basically can do this. We're left with kind of an uneven number here, but just imagine here. There you go. Now it's linked. Imagine this is sort of what happens. So you eat a big complex carb, and what your salivary amylase will do is it will break it down into, disaccharides. So that's why it actually starts to taste a little bit sweet. If you leave some carbohydrates in your spit for a long time, it gets a little sweeter because this complex, big, long, complicated chain is now cleaved into a whole bunch of like little 2-chain molecules. Now, this is really small, right? Like this little tiny 2-chain molecule is not very big, but it's still too big to passively fit through into our bloodstream. So we've got to break it down even further, and that's what's going to happen in the next step. So There's other stuff in your saliva as well. There's electrolytes, and there's also lingual lipase. Lingual lipase is kind of the same thing. It breaks down fats though. So if we look at like, well, that's not going to help. Well, actually, yes, it will. There we go. So you see this picture right here? Here's a big, long, complicated, this is what a fat looks like, right? And lingual lipase is really good at like splitting up your fats. So it's basically going to cleave off some of these fats. And that's why like stuff tastes good, like when you break down carbohydrates, you're like, oh, that's very tasty, right? And when you break down fats, you're like, oh, that's even tastier, well, if me, I happen to be kind of like I'm like a salty, savory person more than I am like a sweets person. So yeah, like that's what lingual lipase does. And there's other proteins and even like waste products in there. Sometimes your lactic acid leaks out of your into your saliva, which is kind of funny. If you're producing like a lot of it, then you've probably experienced that when you've been running. But that is sort of like what's happening in the mouth there. So then after that, we're going to swallow, and then our food is going to travel down the esophagus. That's our tube that is connecting our mouth to our stomach. Really nothing goes on in the esophagus, or at least nothing's supposed to go on in the esophagus. Like your body is just going to simply let this kind of passively pass through things. And get all the way, it's just connecting your mouth to your stomach, right? So I will say it is the first place we can talk about this, though, which is kind of cool, which is peristalsis. This is a term you'll sometimes see. I think this term comes up in our actual nutrition class. But peristalsis is these little tiny wave-like contractions. And it's how your body moves food around through the alimentary canal. Right? Like if you were hanging upside down and you swallowed something, it would still travel to your stomach, even if you're, against gravity, right? And it does it because it does these like little tiny wave-like contractions. I picture it kind of like when you're at the end of a tube of toothpaste and you're doing that thing where you go and you kind of squeeze it from the end and then it pushes it all, right? That's kind of how peristalsis works. It's these little wave-like contractions that kind of move food from one spot to another. But eventually, peristalsis will move that food into the actual stomach, and that is where we can start getting into chemical breakdown. But before we do, any questions so far? Is all that pretty clear, or does anybody have anything they want to talk about? Questions, comments, concerns, everybody? Doesn't seem like it. Nope. Radio silence. All righty. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the process of digestion, right? So remember, digestion is the actual chemical breakdown. So yes, some of that does happen through like chewing and the salivary amylase, like breaking stuff down for sure, right? That is definitely digestion. But really, when we're talking about digestion, we're mostly talking about chemical breakdown. So your stomach is this organ that does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to digestion. So it's this J-shaped pouch that has a whole bunch of different layers, and those layers secrete different materials, creating hydrochloric acid and a bunch of other gastric juices. So hydrochloric acid is a very interesting substance. It is extremely acidic, and it's very good at breaking stuff down, particularly proteins, especially because your stomach acid also has this other material in it called pepsin. And pepsin actually is an enzyme that helps hydrochloric acid break stuff down even better, particularly in proteins. So if you look at the difference between like a double sugar molecule, which you can see here, right? Here's two glucose molecules linked together. They're held together with a very simple little oxygen bond. It's actually pretty easy to break that bond, right? Just kind of snap it apart. But if you look at proteins, the way proteins are held together, they're held together with what we call a peptide bond. Okay, and so not this top part, but this bottom part here. And so you see this like big bond here where there's like a double bond with that oxygen, right? That double bond is a lot harder to break. And that's why we need acid to be able to break this down. And so pepsin breaks the peptide bonds that are in proteins in particular. So let's go ahead and watch a little video here, because hydrochloric acid, by the way, is so acidic that if you were, I think you might have said this in the video, if you were to like pull your own stomach acid out of your body and pour it on like your thigh, it would start dissolving the skin of your thigh. Like it is actually extremely acidic material that would digest you if it could. And you might be wondering like, well, how the heck does it not, how does it not like work its way and just digest the stomach itself if it's made of protein and made of tissue? Well, that's actually why your stomach has several different layers, and those layers create different materials. One of those materials is what we call mucus, and mucus is exactly on the opposite side of the pH scale. So while this is very acidic, mucus is very base. And so like they cancel each other out, and that keeps the stomach from dissolving itself. If you know somebody who has like acid reflux or has like an ulcer, what happened is basically they didn't produce enough mucus and their stomach acid ate through some of that lining. And that's why, they can sometimes get like that heartburn and stuff. But let's go ahead and take a look here. Let's see. What am I doing? Hydrochloric, that should be enough. Chloric acid. Oh, acid burger. Yeah, I've looked this up before. Okay. All right. Here we are going to watch a really nasty video. Well, that's kind of fun, actually. Is that like a non-explanation version?
Financial.
All right, so we're gonna watch this video. That's gonna be, it's gonna dissolve down like a hamburger. It's kind of funny. What's really cool about this is that one of the things I love about showing this video in particular, the guy who's going to explain this is the most scientist-looking scientist you've ever seen. Like, you'll see what I mean in a second.
Get some fumes coming out of this. There we go. Good old McDonald's cheeseburger. Still warm. Tempted to eat it. Okay, so we're going to leave our burger to digest for a while in the acid. Come back later and see what's happened.
Unlike most of the chemicals I talk about, I can be absolutely sure that every person watching has a sample of hydrochloric acid with them as they watch, because hydrochloric acid is found in everybody's stomach and it's part of our digestive process. So as you're watching me, churning away in your stomach is hydrochloric acid, which is one of the first stages in which food is broken down into usable components to give you energy or make you fat.
It's 3.5 hours. So we're going to see what happens to a tasty McDonald's cheeseburger after 3.5 hours of concentrated hydrochloric acid. Okay. Ooh.
Oh my God.
I think it's absolutely disgusting. Ugh. Ugh. So, I mean, the fats aren't really going to dissolve very well because in your stomach there's lots of bile acids and thing in your actual body to do digestion. This is just pure HCl.
So that's what hydrochloric acid does. It really kind of just breaks things down. Now, your actual stomach acid would have all kinds of other chemicals in there that would further break stuff down, right? He mentioned that you'd have like bile salts in there that would break down fats. You would have pepsin, which would break those peptide bonds more effectively. So that's hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid, by the way, is going to be made from hydrogen, the most common thing. We're going to get plenty of that from like water and things like that, and chlorine, actually. which seems kind of crazy. You're like, well, does that mean I'm supposed to drink chlorine? Certainly not. Stay away from that. But you know, when you get like table salt and things like that, it's got little passive bits of chlorine in it. You know, salt actually is a little bit of like sodium and chlorine. And so that actually is one of the ways that you're going to produce your stomach acid. You're actually getting a little bit of that from the salts that are found in foods, and you're going to get it from other minerals and stuff like that as well. So that is our stomach acid. So our food is going to drop into the stomach here. It's going to mix with the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin, which is going to really do a very good job of breaking down our proteins and stuff. So here's what our stomach kind of looks like. You can see all the various different layers there. Now, again, you can see like they're kind of crisscrossing one another. And then what they're doing is they are preventing the stomach itself from digesting itself. You know, that's really important. We really want to make sure that we're not digesting our own stomach, because that's what we get when we get like an ulcer. If we look at like a stomach ulcer, that's going to be a hole in the stomach basically, and it's where unfortunately there just wasn't enough mucus present in a certain part, and so there's maybe like a missing bit of mucus here, and then all of a sudden the acid kind of dissolved through it, and that allowed it to kind of, you know, burn a hole in there, and that can be very, very, very painful, which is why we want to avoid getting stomach, ulcers. So that is happening in the stomach. That's digestion, right? So your stomach inner lining is creating like those mucous membranes, keeping it to protect itself, and it's making a whole bunch of all this material. Now, that material, you know, we put down 2 of the chemicals here. There's actually a lot of chemicals in there, but gastric juice has like intrinsic factor, it has like lingual lipase, it has enzymes and bile salts, it has all kinds of other materials you can see right here, right? Enterokinase, intestinal lipase, peptidase, sucrase, maltase, lactase, right? Lots of different enzymes. The 2 big ones that you usually hear of are going to be the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin. Those are the 2 that I want you guys to kind of mostly focus on. So that's the process of chemical breakdown. The next part we're going to get into is probably the coolest part. We're going to talk about absorption. But before we do, just checking in with you guys again. Any questions on how digestion in the stomach is operating? Anybody need to see a slide again? Oh, my legs. They're so sore. Oh, all right. All right, well, let's look at absorption here. So absorption, right? This is the process where finally we've broken stuff down and it's able to actually get into our bloodstream. So when I say absorption, by definition, what I mean is it's the process of allowing chemicals to pass from the digestive tract into the actual bloodstream itself. We are absorbing the nutrients. Now we are finally making the nutrients part of us, right? It's moving into the donut, right? Out of the center into the blood. So your small intestine is going to start with this beginning section, which is called your duodenum or duodenum. And the duodenum is this part right in the beginning. That's not quite what I'm looking for. Pulling up a picture here of the small intestine. Let's see here, small intestine section. Give me a picture that's colored. There we go. So you can see this section right here, this beginning part of the tube, right? This part right here, that's the duodenum, okay? And then starting about here and about halfway through the small intestine, that's called your jejunum. And then this section through the rest of it is called your ileum. And then eventually it comes all the way over here and starts becoming your large intestine, which is sort of lapping around the small intestine there. So your small intestine's really big. You know, it's actually longer than your large intestine. It's just not quite as wide. So those are our various different sections there. And you can see the fibers look a little bit different, right? You can see this is a little bit smaller. And then this one's like really tightly packed. And then this one is a little bit wider actually to allow stuff to start moving a little bit easier. So those are the three sections of our small intestine, okay? Now, the reason we talked about this is because like you are gonna have a connection in your small intestine, accessory organs. That's not helping me out a ton. I mean, it kind of is. I guess that works. So if you take a look, do I like that version better? No, I don't. If you look at this picture here, right, you'll see, actually there, this is kind of a zoomed out version. So if you take a look at this picture here, you'll actually see there's two little accessory organs that live nearby. Like there's your stomach, and then just kind of off to the side of that is your liver. And then there, next to your liver, you've got this little like thing right here that's called your gallbladder. And then you've actually got your pancreas tucked behind your stomach and behind your small intestine here. The liver, gallbladder, and small intestine all have a tube that connect to that duodenum. So that's actually where they are sort of connecting to it. And those accessory organs are spitting out these little tiny materials that further help with digestion. We're going to talk more about those in just a minute, but there is still a little bit of digestion that takes place in your small intestine that your stomach acid wasn't able to break down, right? Like your stomach acid wasn't just barely wasn't able to kind of finish everything off. You know, there's still some chemicals that need to be broken down further. That's what happens in the duodenum section. Then it can move into like the small intestine proper and really like, you know, start getting to absorption. So when you're thinking of like absorption, guys, like, or when you think of the small intestine, I want you to mostly think of it as like its primary job is absorption. But yes, it does do a little bit of digestion as well in that short little section in the beginning, the duodenum, right? So your small intestine is the primary site for absorption inside the body. And the reason it's actually so good at that, this is what's kind of crazy about your small intestine, is that it's got all of these little tiny projections that are like protruding from the inner like canal there. So if we look at this, these are what are called your villi. So your villi are these little tiny like projections. They look kind of like hairs, right? So inside you'll have this like really big, you know, like fold here. That's called a lumen actually. And so that big fold, and look at how many like little villi are on there. These little tiny projections there. Okay, so villi are microscopically small. These are itty bitty tiny projections. And by the way, they don't just, you know, we're looking at like some 2D drawings here, right? We're looking at, you know, that's kind of 3D, but this is actually what it looks like. Just absolutely covering. That's what the inner tube looks like. It's like your tube has like all, like it has like a furry lining on the middle of it, right? And the reason that's really important is because this is what the inside of each of those little like projections actually looks like. Look at this right here, right? This is a blood vessel. This is a little, these are little capillaries that are threaded into each one of those little tiny hairs. There's these little microscopic blood vessels. So what we're doing when we're absorbing something is we are literally trying to get something to pass from one side. Like, let's say this is like a, you know, we got a little carbohydrate here. We're trying to get this little carbohydrate small enough, which by the way, that's not small enough. So we need to get it, you know, real tiny to be able to move from there all the way over here through the walls into the bloodstream. So this chemical has to be small enough to squeeze through the walls. That's why we spend so much time digesting stuff, is because we're getting something that used to be the size of a donut or a piece of pizza or a steak or a potato, right? We're trying to get something big to squeeze into our blood. It needs to be really small in order to do that. So that is why we have all this like chemical breakdown, right? So the small intestine is the primary site for absorption, and it absorbs because of your intestinal villi. And your villi are these little microscopic projections that are lined with blood vessels. And that is how your blood is being exposed to like all the foods that you need to, that you're eating, right? Like imagine if you had to eat passively by just like absorbing stuff into your blood. You would have to expose your blood to like the atmosphere and then have foods be small enough that they can be carried by your little tiny red blood cells, which by the way are the smallest cells in your entire body, right? So that would obviously be very difficult, right? You would have to basically take like pure glucose, like sugar, open up your arm and like score and then like close it, and then you're exposing it to the atmosphere and all kinds of other things. Like you're definitely going to get a virus. You're definitely going to get like a bacterial infection, so luckily we don't have to do that. We are able to enter it through like our mouth into our stomach acid, which by the way, if there is a bacteria or a virus or something that was like living on our food like as we ate it, it's not going to survive that acid. That's what's kind of funny. Like if you talk about like your immune system, the heaviest lifter of your immune system, I know we all talk about like white blood cells and stuff like that, and yeah, immune cells are obviously very important, but the main part of your immune system is just your stomach acid. Like or I don't know about the main part, but it's like the heaviest lifter. It kills more bacteria than anything else out there, so it sort of purifies our food, and obviously that doesn't always happen. Sometimes like bacteria lives, and if it makes it into your small intestine, and if your immune system becomes aware of it, it's like it survived the stomach. If something survived, that's how you get food poisoning, and that's what causes things to come out both ends. So it doesn't always work, but that's what your stomach acid does, right? It breaks everything down, and now it gets so small. We get these little tiny chemicals, right? Like these are now individual little sugars, right? All broken down, right? That now they can actually pass into the walls of our blood vessels. So if we had like a villi, right? Let's say we had like we got a villi right here and like another one right here, right? And now there's blood vessels in here, right? So we would have like this blood vessel here that would kind of branch out and branch out, right? And this is kind of becoming exposed to our bloodstream there. And then, we'd have obviously traveling like back in the opposite direction, right? So there's our, sort of suck it back in, right? So like the red section's kind of exposing the blood too, and then the blue section, and then, it kind of continue travel, and like this is going to go back to the heart to get pumped around to wherever it has to go, right? So what's going to happen is this chemical is now small enough that it is going to pass straight through this wall, and it's going to get into the blood. And that is how we are going to actually absorb our nutrients. We are passing it through our intestinal villi, right? Now you do also have like little microvilli on there. You can actually kind of see it here. These little tiny, like, you kind of see these little hairs almost. That's what your microvilli are. Microvilli, you can see a picture of that here as well. Zoom in a little bit, see those little microvilli. So microvilli aren't as important as like villi. Basically microvilli are these little hair-like projections. They move nutrients around. So here's how I want you guys to think about absorbing food, right? I want you to think of that little kid's toy. This one right here. I want you to think of this little like kid's toy. You always see them in like doctor's offices and stuff. But the square fits through the square hole, the circle fits through the circle hole, the triangle fits through the triangle hole, right? Think of that as carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. You got little square-shaped holes for your carbohydrates. You got little triangle-shaped holes for your proteins. You got little circle-shaped holes for your fats. And so what happens if you eat a material that is not food? Like what happens if you swallow a piece of plastic by mistake, right? Like you're so excited, you eat a candy wrapper, you know, like, and you swallow that whole candy wrapper. Well, you don't really have to worry too much about that candy wrapper getting its way into your blood. Number one, hydrochloric acid's very bad at dissolving plastics. So it's probably just going to stay at one big chunk and come out the other end uninterrupted, which is not going to feel great, but it'll be fine. But like, it's not food. We don't have the tools necessary in our digestive system to break things down that are not food. We're really good at breaking down food. We're really bad at breaking down anything that's not food, you know? So when a material like a virus or a bacteria or something like that does get into us that is not food and, you know, survives the stomach acid and gets to our villi, it doesn't usually fit through the holes. It doesn't really fit into the slots because it's not really protein shaped. This is actually how artificial sweeteners work. So artificial sweeteners look kind of similar to this. They look just a little bit different than our carbohydrates. They look very similar, but just a little bit different. And so they look similar enough that at the taste buds, they trick your brain into thinking that something tastes like sugar. Your taste bud doesn't know the difference between the two shapes. It's like, oh yeah, that's really sweet tasting. Cool. But your digestive system's like, that's not food. I don't have slots for that. I can't fit that through. That will not fit through this shaped hole, right? It won't fit through the carbohydrates hole. So for the most part, your artificial sweeteners do not pass into your bloodstream, and then you end up peeing them out. That's also what happens with like sugar alcohols, for instance, right? Which you find in like gum. They taste like sugar, but they don't get absorbed like sugar, which is why people who are on like keto diets can, you know, taste these really sweet foods. They can have like brownies and stuff. You're like, how does somebody on keto have a brownie? Well, it doesn't have any actual sugar in it. They use like a fake sugar alcohol, which makes it taste really sweet without actually being very sweet. So that is your small intestine. That is how we're actually absorbing things, right? And so your small intestine is a big long tube. I mean, think about it, right? You're just moving this wet, soupy material that used to be your food. You know, there we go. Actually, this is 100% the picture I was looking for earlier. There's the duodenum, there's the jejunum, there's the ileum. But you're just moving this material like through the whole thing. It's just kind of working its way around, just taking a ride through the small intestine, right? Until eventually, I went in the wrong direction, so I got lost somehow. Make sure I never have to lead us through a maze, guys. And then we end up like working our way out to the large intestine there. So that is giving us a lot of time to expose all of that food and all that material to our bloodstream, right? Because every one of those little villi projections are filled with blood vessels. And that is how that's becoming exposed there. Now, we're talking about digestion here. I'm going to skip forward just slightly. There is a little bit more digestion that does take place in your large intestine. I'm sorry, we're talking about digestion. Sorry, I'm lying. We're not talking about that. We already talked about digestion. We're talking about absorption. There is a little bit more absorption that takes place in the large intestine. So your large intestine is an additional site for absorption. If anything just didn't get absorbed by your small intestine, hopefully it's going to get picked up by your large intestine. So it's sort of a backup plan there. But the big thing that's happening is your large intestine is primarily responsible for absorbing water. So water, right, which is something that is going to be found in lots of foods. You're continually drinking it. We usually like to drink while we're eating, right, because that kind of helps us with digestion. Water is really, really important because it's mixing with all that food. It makes, like, you know, your food used to be these big solid chunks, and then we mix some water into it, and it became this kind of like wet, soupy paste, right? And the wetter and the soupier it is, the easier it's going to have, you know, a time moving around, right? This is why, like, some people who have like indigestion, it kind of helps to just drink a little bit of water sometimes, because that water can actually help get things moving a little bit better. Or if you're constipated, water can really, 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 really help with that. So like water is going to get in, and it's going to make it easier for all these like chemicals to move around, right? Stuff moves pretty easily through water, you know? it's providing a means, kind of fills it up, and so it can get exposed to the ceiling and the floor, so we want to have like plenty of water in there, but we obviously need to have it we need to get that water into our bloodstream as well. So where that happens is actually at your digestive and at the large intestine. So your large intestine is going to absorb all of your water, and what's going to happen is, the water is mixed into that chyme, right? This is gonna be nasty looking, actually. So this is what your chyme kind of looks like. Chyme is the paste I'm talking about, like the wet, soupy material, right? It's a suspension of nutrients. You can kind of see that here, right? Like this section here, it's all these like little nutrients that are sort of suspended in it, right? And so your chyme is actually how we are sort of like moving this material around, these chemicals around, right? So chyme is full of water. We need to pull all the water out of that chyme. Now, what's that doing, guys? That's dehydrating the chyme, right? So we're pulling the water out. Now, yesterday we talked about dehydration synthesis, right? When you pull the water out of something, what happens? It starts to become more solid. Stuff starts to link together. So that wet, soupy chyme, which used to have carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals, vitamins in it, right? Used to have all of our nutrients in it. It went through the small intestine, and the vitamins, the minerals, the proteins, the fats, the carbs, all those things started entering our bloodstream. And now the chyme, you're really just left with like fiber and waste products, and some electrolytes, like sodium and potassium and things like that. They're still in there a little bit because those things like to kind of stay hanging. They like to hang out with water. And you get a lot of water in there. So you got like water and waste products, right? Because everything else has been absorbed by your small intestine. So now when it gets to the large intestine starts pulling the water out. It's like, nope, I need that, right? And so it starts pulling the water into your bloodstream. And now that chyme starts compacting and starts becoming a solid. The molecules start linking together until eventually it gets all the way through your large intestine. And now all of the water has been pulled out of well, not all the water, but a good chunk of the water has been pulled out of there. And you're left with like a solid. And that's where you've got your poops. That's sort of what's left over afterwards. It's all the waste products that you didn't absorb from your foods. The sodium, the potassium, the water, all that got pulled out of there. And what you're left with is nothing but like waste, which your body is going to eliminate, and that's what it's going to sort of like get rid of, So that's what's happening there. So that is the overall process. Now, I did mention we've got these like accessory organs. So we got to go back here and kind of finish up talking about like how we sort of like bring everything together, right? So your stomach acid is pretty good at breaking stuff down. At least it's really good at breaking down like proteins in particular, pretty good at breaking down carbohydrates as well. But fats, your stomach, honestly, if you were to drop like fat, like that's what's kind of like, if you took like the same the experiment, you saw like that didn't just dissolve. I mean, if you look at like something, let's see here, you look at something dissolving in an acid, let's see, let's find a video of this. Easy dissolving. So this is actually called Piranha Solution.
This
is actually
food is Dave's hot chicken.
Way more intense, way more intense than hydrochloric acid. But this is Piranha Solution, which is one of the most. This is probably one of the most aggressive dissolving materials on the planet. And so what he's going to do is he's creating some of that, and then he's got a plastic rod here. And you'll notice, like, if he dips it in there, you can see it just completely dissolve. And it looks like liquid. I mean, like, it's so broken down, right? And by the way, it's really hot, actually. This is really dangerous stuff. Do not mess with Piranha Solution. So, like, it breaks down plastics. Our stomach acid is not as acidic as Piranha Solution. So it doesn't really break down certain materials. One of the things that our stomach acid is not so good at breaking down is fats. Fats survive pretty darn well. If you were to take hydrochloric acid and drop like a really fatty material in there, it would kind of, for the most part, try to stay a solid, you know? That's actually why that hamburger, you saw some of it stayed as like big clumps. That was like the cheese and like the fat from the meat in that cheeseburger. And that's why that didn't break. That's why some of it stayed a solid instead of just fully getting liquidized. So how do we break down fats? Obviously we need to get fat small enough. We got to get that to pass into the villi, right? We need like these little fatty acid chains. Fatty acid chains that kind of look like this, right? They're these big, long little chains with these little tails at the end. They got like a little head on them. They kind of look like music notes in a way. But that's kind of what a fatty acid, this is a triglyceride, right? So this is 3 little molecules, right? 3 little fatty acids. So that's a fatty acid, that's a fatty acid, and that's a fatty acid. And those 3 fatty acids are linked together with this little backbone right here. And that backbone is a molecule of what's called glycerol. So that's a tri-1,2,3 glyceride. And that is what you're eating. This is either, you know, a saturated fat or an unsaturated fat. You know, this is something you've eaten. So what we need to do, we got to break these apart. We need that fatty acid, and we need that fatty acid, and we need that fatty acid to be small enough to pass their way into the bloodstream. So in order to do that, we got to be able to break our fats down. How do we break down fats? Well, luckily, you've got this accessory organ attached to your small intestine. So you've got what's called your liver, okay? And your liver is this little accessory organ. It's got these really cool like little sections. You got alpha cells and beta cells and all this really cool stuff inside of it, but we're not going to go into that today. But what your liver does is it creates this material called bile. So bile is what we call an emulsifier. So an emulsifier is, if you guys have ever made like ground beef, you know, if you're making like burritos or something, tacos for dinner, or if you're making like pasta, right, like spaghetti, you know, you're using like ground beef. Ground beef has so much fat in it, right? And so when you're done cooking that stuff, right, there's all that grease left over in the pan. Now, if you take that pan over to your sink and you spray it with water, what happens? Nothing. You know, like the fat is just like, that's fine, I don't care about water, right? And it kind of just bounces right off. That's because fat is hydrophobic. Fats have, you know, like I said, they get those little like tails, right? So you take a look right here, you can see there's those little tails that I was drawing much worse. You know, they kind of look like this. They, you know, whoop, and then they got a little tail there. So this side here, right? This side with the little, like the little head, the circle head, that actually is totally attracted to water. That's fine. We like water in that section. But this section, the tail on the inside, does not like water. That's hydrophobic. So what ends up happening if we look at like fats in water is that they sort of like crowd in on themselves. They kind of form like a circle that protects them, right? You can see that kind of they put the tail in on the hydrophobic, the scared of water side on the inside. They put the hydrophilic, the side that kind of likes water, on the outside. And what that does is that means water has a really hard time separating these fats, right? It's kind of like, you know, if you were trying to protect somebody, right? You would just make a ring around them, right? And then like that middle person, and no matter like what's coming at this side, like everybody else is kind of, you know, getting hit in the back, but like you're protecting that inner person. That's what happens with fats. It's very protected from water. So when you put oil in water, it makes these big, we call these globules. It makes these big globules that can't really break that down. So how are we going to break that down? Well, that's where emulsifiers come in. So if we use an emulsifier, and I'm not finding a good picture of this, emulsifier. There we go. Oh, no. I'm trying to find a good picture that kind of shows this. So an emulsifier is basically something that breaks down fats. So you run that greasy pan under water, nothing happens. But you run that greasy pan under water and you squirt a little bit of dish soap in there. The dish soap, boom, breaks it all up because dish soap is an emulsifier. So if we look, let's see here, oil in water.
Question.
Yes. Yeah.
So is that okay? So that's what happens, because I do that sometimes too when there's some grease left in the pan from like cooking ground beef.
Yeah.
So that's what that does when you put dish soap, like just like a couple drops, like you just see it separate and like just like it's not there no more.
Exactly. So what an emulsifier does is it basically takes this triglyceride, right, and it breaks them apart. It basically just breaks this little bond right here. And then now you're left with individual little components, and now they're much smaller, so it looks like they dissolve into the rest of everything, right? And then you can break it up and move it off of it. And that's how dish soap is operating. So if we look at oil and water, it kind of looks like this initially. Skipping ads. Right? You can see like it all just kind of floats to the top, right? And stays separated from the water itself. So now you get an oil layer, you get a water layer, they're totally separated. But you put some dish soap in there and stir it up. And you will notice that it will evenly mix all that fat into the water. Now you get this kind of weird looking material there, right? And that's like a very oily water. And so emulsification is how we separate those things out. Now it can eventually kind of like re-separate. So, you know, those fat molecules will be attracted to one another. But when we stir it up there, you can see that's what dish soap does. This is what bile is doing inside your body. Bile is just like dish soap. It breaks down fats. So now you got carbohydrates, proteins, and fats coming into your stomach. Your stomach acid is going to do a really good job of breaking down the proteins, right? So now you got all kinds of individual little proteins. We call those amino acids, right? So now you get all those, and amino acids, they're ready to go into the bloodstream. But carbohydrates, they're like, you know, your salivary amylase took this big long chain, broke it into double chains, but two chains too big to fit into our bloodstream. So we need to get them into single chains. Stomach acid is going to kind of break some of those down, so they can pass into the bloodstream. But the fat, it's like, well, how do we break fat down, right? Well, it passes from your stomach, does not break down your fats. Your fats live, but then they get into the very first section of your small intestine, and your liver, which created that bile, secretes that bile into the first section of your small intestine. Through this little duct right here. So you can see there's your stomach and there's the small intestines right here, right? And there's this little duct, this little green duct here is going to put it right in there, right? So that gallbladder, and actually, you know what? I just remembered something. I need to do this. Daryl, you're probably having a little bit of a hard time seeing this. Let me show you this here. There we go. So I'm going to highlight.
I'm doing my best.
Yeah. So let me show you. I can highlight it for you. So there is a separation right here. This is the duct right there. And it's going to go behind the stomach. So it goes behind that layer there, and attaches here. There's where the duct is coming in, and it enters into the small intestine right here. There's the arrow that kind of shows that. And then there's a little separation here. I don't know if you can see that. Right, that little separation there. So this is the liver, right? This big guy here is the liver. And then there's this other one, this little bit right here, that's your gallbladder. We're going to talk about that in just 1 second. And then both of them share a duct, this little duct starting right here, that eventually goes into the small intestine, which is this section here. Okay, does that help visualize that pretty easily? Hopefully.
Yeah, very much.
Okay. I'm like, I'm trying. I know these are already a somewhat dark color, so that's going to make it all blend together. So your liver creates bile, and it needs to get bile into the duodenum. And this is where fats get broken down. Now, it happens really easily, by the way. Fats instantly break down. So now they're all broken down and it's moving through your small intestine, which is why fats are going to get absorbed now. Now, your liver usually can't keep up with how fast you eat fats because we bring in a pretty large amount of fats per meal. And unfortunately, our liver just can't keep up with that. So it has this little helper organ called the gallbladder. The gallbladder does not do anything beyond storing bile that the liver has made throughout the day. So like your gallbladder doesn't actually make anything. It doesn't create any materials. It's this little pear-shaped organ. It's attached to the liver. It stores bile. So your gallbladder is actually what secretes. When you eat, your nervous system says, oh, okay, and it activates the gallbladder. The gallbladder squirts bile into the duodenum there. It was made by your liver. So the liver, right, and that's why it's going, you know, there's this little duct here, right? It goes from here into the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder sends it this way. So it goes liver into this little tube here and threads up into the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder sends it from here behind into the small intestine. Okay, so the gallbladder is the one that's actually secreting it, but it didn't make anything. Your liver makes bile. Your gallbladder stores excess bile. This is actually why you can remove your gallbladder. If anybody ever has like a gallstone or something like that, and you have to have your gallbladder removed, it's not really that big a deal. Basically, doctors, what they'll do is they'll just directly connect a tube from your liver straight to your small intestine, which does a pretty good job. But if you ever have like a really fatty meal, like with a lot of fat all at once, some of that fat won't get broken down because your liver just kind of can't keep up. It didn't have like a backup storage. So you'll get like a little bit of like indigestion and an upset stomach towards like the later processes, because you'll have these like full fats that didn't get broken down coming out the back end. So you can see here's a diagram of the tubes. By the way, there's the liver, right? And it's attached to the gallbladder. And then it actually shares a tube. There's one other thing. There's your pancreas. That's also going to connect to that tube. Your pancreas is a separate accessory organ. You're probably familiar with the pancreas when we talk about like diabetes, right? Your pancreas is responsible for creating like insulin inside the body. But on this outside section, in the digestive tract, it's responsible for creating pancreatic amylase, which also helps break down fats a little bit, but is also very good at breaking down carbohydrates. So if there were any carbohydrates that survived in your stomach acid, your pancreas is going to finally break all that stuff down at the very end. So that's the pancreas right there. You can see this little organ that, you know, there's the tube coming from, there's the tube that actually comes from the liver. There's the tube that comes from the gallbladder. They all both go in. There's the section where they enter the small intestine, and then the pancreas shares that tube as well. So pancreatic amylase breaks down those carbohydrates into individual like sugar molecules at the very end there. So that's our accessory organ. So if anything survived, the stomach acid and the bile salts, if anything survived like that, your pancreas is going to kind of pick up the pieces and finish it. And that's where, like, yeah, there's some digestion that takes place in your small intestine, but most of your digestion takes place in the stomach beforehand. Okay. Then everything's broken down and we go through that process of absorption that I mentioned. Stuff gets sucked into your velas. Carbohydrates go into the carbohydrate slots. Proteins go into the protein slots. Fats go into the fat slots. Vitamins go into the vitamin slots. Minerals go into the mineral slots, except for a couple of them, like sodium and potassium. Those are your electrolyte minerals. They usually don't get absorbed in the small intestine. They kind of keep living, working their way through until you get to the large intestine, and then all the water and all the electrolytes get sucked in. And now that wet, soupy material starts getting attracted and becomes like a solid mass. And that solid mass is what we call our stool. And that's what we got to get rid of. And that's the process of digestion, guys. Like I said, it gets pretty gross sometimes, but hopefully you have a pretty good understanding of this. This gives us a really much deeper understanding of nutrition. Like the problem, like people think nutrition is just about like bringing in food, and then that food just like all food is kind of created equally. Well, actually, honestly, food kind of is created equally. At the end of the day, like stuff all gets broken down into the same components. Carbohydrates become glucose, proteins become amino acids, fats become fatty acids, right? They become individual components. Vitamins, minerals, those are already broken down. And so they can just kind of get absorbed once they, they just kind of work their way to the absorption side. They don't have to break down any further. But you might notice that like it actually does kind of give us a deeper appreciation for the fact that like food is kind of created equally, at least in terms of their individual components. Now, what that might make you think it's like, well, I guess I can just go eat Oreos and Pop-Tarts, and that can be my carbohydrate source. Well, here's why that's not so great. By understanding how digestion works, you will notice that like, remember, the sweeter something tastes, the simpler it is. We're going to see that in just a second when we get to the nutrition bit here at the end. The sweeter something is, the simpler it is. The simpler it is, the less hard your digestive system has to work to break it down. It's already broken down. It's already really simple, right? When we eat complex stuff, our body has to work really hard to break it down, which is good. When it doesn't have to break anything down, it just goes straight into our bloodstream. And then what ends up happening is that spikes our blood sugar levels. And when our blood sugar levels are too high, we kind of struggle. Our metabolism really can't operate. All that cellular respiration, remember, you got to be able to breathe oxygen into your cells, right? But if there's just like sugar gumming up the works, imagine if you were trying to breathe and, you had a bunch of sugar just like laying on your face, right? You probably, that would suck. Right? If you were buried in sand, buried in sugar, right? Like you're gonna have a really hard time breathing. That's what happens to your cells. Like they can't breathe because there's just way too much sugar in your blood, which is why when our blood sugar gets really high, our body goes, whoa, and lowers our blood sugar levels, right? This is why like sugar is so bad for us, is because it's just too darn simple. It's too easy for us to absorb. So it ends up spiking things and interrupting other metabolic process, starts gumming up the works. So let's talk a little bit about nutrition. Let's talk about like how what we just talked about digestion wise is going to play a direct role in us understanding nutritional advice to our clients and metabolism, right? So nutrition by definition is the means by which biologic organisms intake and absorb essential nutrients for maintaining life. It's a good definition. It is. That's kind of a definition of like the study of nutrition. But here's how I like to think about it. Nutrition is basically how it's how our body takes in nutrients. And there's going to be 6 nutrients out there, guys, in the universe. That's how many there are. 6 essential nutrients. We've got proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins, minerals, and the most important of all, water. Those are your 6 essential nutrients. That's what you got to eat every day. Proteins, fats, carbs, vitamins, minerals, water, right? Our body is, made of definitely protein, right? The skin is protein, right? But we've also got carbohydrates, which is giving me the energy to do everything that I'm doing right now. And we got fats, and there's fats in my body as well that are there giving me structure, right? And then I got more minerals, like my skeleton is made of calcium, right? That's a mineral. Inorganic substance that I absolutely need to have be part of me, right? This inorganic sort of rock part of my body. That's our skeletal system. And then vitamins are going to help interact with everything to allow us to use all of the other nutrients. So those are your 6 essential nutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. So we're going to split these into sections here. Right? We're going to have what we call our macronutrients. And macronutrients are nutrients that we need lots of every day. A little more space. And we're going to split these into micronutrients. Micronutrients are the type that we need very little of every single day. So, and then we also need, I need one more category. I didn't give myself enough room. Macronutrients, and water. So water is a really big one as well. So your macronutrients, we've got 3 of these. We got fats, we got carbs, carbohydrates, and we've got proteins. Okay, your micronutrients, we're going to split these into 2 mini categories. That's terrible. Micronutrients, we've got vitamins and minerals. So those are, and then water is water. So those are your 6 essential nutrients, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and water being itself. So nutrition is how we're going to use these materials, right? It's the study of how we do all this stuff. So macro, from the word meaning super large, right? Macronutrients are nutrients that we need in large amounts every day. Usually we are going to measure macronutrients in grams. You might hear somebody say, hey, you need 20 grams of this, or you'll see in a nutrition label, it has 15 grams of protein, 12 grams of carbohydrates, right? We measure them in grams because that's how much we need. Typical person needs, you know, a goodly amount of protein every day. Typical person needs a goodly amount of fats and carbs every single day. So those are our macronutrients. Micronutrients, we usually measure those in milligrams or even micrograms if we need very, very small amounts. So if you need more than 100 milligrams per day, or less than 100 milligrams per day, either way, we're measuring them in milligrams, not grams, right? So that is going to be like 1,000th of that unit. Those are your vitamins. You don't need a lot of vitamins every day. You don't need a lot of minerals every day. You just need enough, right, in order to sort of like function. So macronutrients, looking at the 3 big ones here, we've got carbohydrates first. So carbohydrates are these big complex chains of, we'll come back to calories, sugar molecules, right? So there are a couple different types of carbohydrates out there, okay? You are going to see, making this smaller here, monosaccharides. That needs to be even smaller. Oh. All right, let's make this itty bitty. I know you guys can't read that, so I'm going to zoom in here. So in our carbohydrates, we've got monosaccharides, which is individual sugar molecules. When I said glucose earlier, that was a monosaccharide. We've also got disaccharides, which is double sugar molecules. That's 2 sugar molecules linked together. And we've got polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are very, very, very complex carbs that are going to, like, you know, be lots of things. So generally, when we talk about carbohydrates, they're these big chains of sugar molecules. So the more complicated a food is, the bigger and the longer the chain is. So if we look at, like, you look at carbohydrates, the 3 versions that you've got, oh, don't make me type the whole thing. That works, I guess. No, that doesn't really work. Give me a better picture. There we go. So this is kind of what they look like, right? There's a monosaccharide right here. It's a 1 sugar molecule, right? Here's a disaccharide. That's 2 sugar molecules. Here's a polysaccharide. That's a lot of different sugars all linked together, right? So the more complicated something is, the less sweet it's going to taste, but the more carbohydrates it will have in it. This is actually why you find so many grams worth of carbohydrates in, like complex carbs, like whole wheat bread and things like that. So there's actually going to be, plenty of energy trapped within there. So that's what a carbohydrate is. It's big, long, complicated chains of sugars. Proteins are these big, long chains of, I gotta skip to proteins here. My notes are all out of order. Proteins are the big, complex chains of amino acids, right? So when we look at proteins, they're gonna be chains of amino acids, okay? Now, amino acids, there are 20 of them out there, and that's all of them, by the way. There's only 20 in the whole universe. But those proteins, or those amino acids, they all come together to form different proteins. So when you look at like amino acids, you'll see them all linked together, right? So we take 20 ingredients. Think of amino acids, or think of like protein as like a chef, like the world's greatest chef, who can literally make every material on the planet, right? He can literally cook anything out of 20 ingredients. If he's got those 20 ingredients, he can make anything in the universe, right? That's actually what's happening with proteins. It just depends on like what order he puts those 20 in, right? So when you look at like this version here, go ahead and just like, I wrote my calculator. This, let's say this is skin, right? Just for the sake of argument here. So here's a molecule of skin, right? But then, like, let's just say I rearrange this, right? I'm just going to go ahead and, put this one over here first. We'll put this one second. Put this one third. Put this one fourth. And I'll put this one fifth, right? By the way, I should probably relabel these. So there we go. We got different, like, different levels. So now this isn't a molecule of skin anymore. This is a molecule of, let's say, muscle, right? And guess what? If I flip the order around and I make a new order and I put it like this time, maybe I put 2 R's in a row. So I did that by mistake. And I put that one there, right? This is a completely new protein. Completely different protein, right? This one is, let's say this is DNA, right? So now we've got very, very, very different looking proteins here. Depending on what order I put them in, I'm going to get a different protein every single time. So there's 20 of them, and then any combination of that can make any protein in the universe. So when you're eating protein, what you're eating is a whole bunch of amino acids that have been chained together in whatever shape it happens to be. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Now you'll hear people describe the difference between like a complete protein and an incomplete protein. A complete protein is a protein that has all amino acids in it, okay? And an incomplete protein is missing one or more essential amino acids, because that's one other thing that we got to talk about. Your body can also make amino acids in the same way that it can make proteins, right? So like, think of it, like I said, as ingredients, right? You got a chef that can make any food in the universe with 20 ingredients. Some of those ingredients are things like salt and garlic, and some of those things are special ingredients like, garlic salt, Garlic salt, I don't really need to like eat that directly. I can always just put a little bit of garlic and a little bit of salt separately, and I've got garlic salt, right? Like, I put those two things together. I made one of my little ingredients there myself without having to go buy it, you know? That's what's happening with your proteins. There are some proteins that your body can just be like, oh, okay, it'll take an amino acid, it'll break it down and turn it into a different amino acid. So those are what we call non-essential amino acids, meaning that it's not really essential that they're part of your diet. You need to have them in order to make a protein, but your body can make them itself. The essential amino acids, you can't. There are going to be 8 essential amino acids that you cannot make without your body eating them. And so when you have a food that is considered a complete protein, that means that it has all the essential amino acids. If you have an incomplete protein, it's missing one or more. So which foods are complete and which foods are incomplete? Well, generally, if it's an animal product, you know it's a complete protein. An animal's body assembled that protein. If you eat meat, right, which is like the muscle of an animal, right, that animal's body assembled all 20 proteins in order to make that muscle. So we know it's a complete protein. Milk, eggs, anything from an animal is going to be complete. Now, there are a few plant-based sources of complete proteins as well. Soy, for instance, is a complete protein. That's why it's so popular amongst vegans, right? Quinoa is actually a complete protein. It's a grain. There's a few complete proteins out there. Now, do you have to eat complete proteins only as part of your diet? No, you can always pair up incomplete proteins, right? Like if I were to eat like beans, which are incomplete, and rice, which is also incomplete, and I eat those two things together, beans and rice, they fill in each other's gaps. And now I've created a complete protein. So this is not me telling you you have to be a carnivore. This is not me telling you that you have to have like an omnivore diet and like eat meat and stuff. You can absolutely live a very long, healthy life as vegan. But it is very important to make sure that you do get every amino acid in, which is why like you will sometimes hear of vegans who they'll get really unhealthy. They'll like struggle with their health because they'll eat nothing but like incomplete proteins, like pasta with like, you know, and like it's always pasta. And then like they're not getting like beans, right? Pasta and beans, they complement each other. So you want to have like a mixture of that stuff in your diet. If you're only eating like one type of carbohydrate, which is going to have some protein in it, you're probably only getting one type of amino acid profile. You need to get like multiple amino so that they can fill in each other's gaps. So those are our proteins, these big complex chains of amino acids. So, you know, we had carbohydrates, which are chains of sugar. We had proteins, which are chains of amino acids. And now we got fats, and fats are actually very simple. They're going to be chains of fatty acids. And I guess I could just say fatty acids, actually. So fats are going to be fatty acids. So what fatty acids are there? Well, there's saturated fatty acids, and then there's unsaturated fatty acids. And that's what you're going to see in a nutrition label. You look at a nutrition facts panel, you'll notice trying to find the one that has all 4. Oh my God. Come on. Oh God, internet, you are literally trying to stab me in the heart. So stupid. There we go. Good Lord. There's a picture of just, yeah. So the reason I was having trouble, by the way, you'll notice the old nutrition facts panel, they really only cared about like saturated and trans fats, but there's 4 types of fats. So saturated, that's a fatty acid. Trans fats, that's a fatty acid. Polyunsaturated, that is a fatty acid. And mono unsaturated, that is a fatty acid. So those are the 4 types of fats that we've got. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about like fats. Now, we love to break down fats for energy. Our body is basically able to skip glycolysis and go straight to the Krebs cycle with fats, which is great. It just has to oxidize those fats first. So what it'll do is it'll use this process known as beta oxidation to basically lift off that and convert that into the first ingredient that goes through the Krebs cycle. That's how people who are on a keto diet get away with not eating carbohydrates. They can't do glycolysis because they don't have glucose in their diet, but they can still do aerobic metabolism, which is where most of us spend most of our time anyways. And then cholesterols are going to be found within our fats. You will sometimes see those as part of that. Cholesterols are going to be like a little bit of a fat attached to a small protein. So you're either going to have like really dense versions or really undense versions. So those are that's sort of a broad overview of our 3 macronutrients. Now for our micronutrients, all we've got are vitamins and minerals, right? So micronutrients are needed in very small amounts, and they give us like, you know, different body structure. If it's a mineral, it gives us body structure, like our, you know, calcium and things like that. But vitamins actually allow us to sort of metabolize things. They actually make our metabolism better at doing certain things. So we're going to see 2 major categories of each of these. We're going to see fat soluble vitamins. And we are going to see water soluble vitamins. So fat soluble vitamins and water soluble vitamins are 2 major categories there. You can probably already tell what these mean. Fat soluble breaks down in fat. Water soluble breaks down in water. So that's how we actually digest our vitamins or carry them around through the body. So we need to have plenty of water in our diet in order to be able to absorb our water soluble vitamins. We also need fat to be an essential part of our diet because that's going to allow us to absorb the fat soluble vitamins. Minerals, you're going to have 2 major categories here. Major minerals and trace minerals. Major minerals you need lots of every day, over 100 milligrams, and trace minerals you need little of every day, under 100 milligrams. So copper, iodine, fluorine, manganese, molybdenum, magnesium, iron, sodium, potassium, chlorine, all of those are minerals, right? They're all rocks that you're going to find out there in the world. But we use them in our body to, you know, give our body structure and do certain metabolic functions. So you're going to find a lot of sources out there for your vitamins and minerals. I'm not going to go through all these right now because we're going to go over these much more in depth in our nutrition class, but those are the really good sources of our vitamins. And then here's really good sources of minerals there. It's kind of a cheat sheet that's really helpful for if you ever need to like know where to find certain materials. Now, the most important nutrient is going to be water. Water is all by itself, but water not only cools the body, but it also allows us to do everything metabolically, right? We either use hydrolysis to shove water in between molecules to break them down, or we use dehydration synthesis to pull the water out of something and attach things together. So we need to have lots of water in our body to literally metabolize stuff. And it is the most essential nutrient. You know, you can go quite a while without eating. You cannot go very long without drinking. Although you can't go very long without breathing. That's the real most essential nutrient. And then lastly, we've got calories here. If we are talking about calories, calories are how much energy is trapped within food. So there's no way you can hold a calorie. There's no such thing as a calorie, weirdly enough. I mean, there is. It's just like, it's a unit of measurement. It's like an inch. It's like, show me what an inch is. It's like, well, it's a measurement tool, right? Show me what a degree is, you know, like a temperature. It's just a measuring tool, right? So it's not something that like is in the body. It's not like you're, you know, bringing calories into the body. Calories are just a measuring tool of how much energy is trapped within our foods. So you want to make sure that you have less calories coming in than you have going out every day if you're trying to lose weight. Like if I burn 3,000 calories, but I eat 2,500 calories, that's a 500 calorie deficit. That energy has to come from somewhere. So it's going to come from the stored energy that I have in my body. Now, if I eat 3,500 calories, but I only burn 3,000 calories, well, that extra 500 had to go somewhere. So it will become part of my body. And my body will store that energy in my fat cells. And we'll talk more about that in the future. But that's what calories actually are. They're simply a unit of measurement. So how many calories are found in each of these materials? Well, in your fats, we are going to have 9 calories per gram. In your carbohydrates, we are going to have 4 calories per gram. And for every gram of protein, we are also going to have 4 calories per gram. So fats have 9 calories every single time. Carbohydrates have 4, and proteins have 4. And that's how we can actually figure out exactly how many calories you need to eat every day and how many grams of each macronutrient you need to eat every day. And that's something we're going to learn when we get to our nutrition class after this, after we get out of exercise physiology. So that is honestly about it. Summarizing everything up, digestion is the process of breaking stuff down so that we can make these macronutrients small enough to actually get into our bloodstream. Your stomach is going to process most of that, although your small intestine does a little bit of digestion as well. And once everything's very, very small, your small intestine is going to actually receive all those nutrients and absorb them into your bloodstream. So that's kind of it, guys. That's the whole process of the digestive tract. I know that I kind of laid the groundwork today. You probably have some questions about nutrition. We'll definitely be going much more in depth into understanding what a fat is, what a carbohydrate is, what a protein is, what vitamins are, what minerals are. You know, we're going to get more into that as we get into our actual nutrition class. But for now, you can understand how we catabolically break all of this stuff up to get it into our body. The main thing we're going to talk about next week is going to be these carbohydrates. We're going to be talking a lot about how sugar actually gives us energy. But we have to get them to be sugars first, because right now they're going to be these big, long, complicated chains. I can't do anything with that. But if it's an individual sugar, that we can use. So we'll talk about that, getting into that probably, we'll get into that on Tuesday next week. And understand how carbohydrates become energy. And then on Monday, we're going to talk about how we bring oxygen into the body, which is going to make us even better at using those carbohydrates for energy. So that is about it, guys. Any final questions or comments? Anybody worried about anything you want me to go over?
I'm good on my end over here.
Yeah. Love that.
Been taking a lot of notes on it.
Hey, good. Love that. Yeah, that's a good choice. So guys, it's your first weekend. Now, I'm going to keep Silos. Oh, that's fun. Oh, those are good. Oh yeah, you're a tattoo artist. I was like, those are really good. So I'm going to keep Silos and Muhammad. I'm going to keep you guys for just a minute or two. I want to show you how Canvas works. Okay. But homework number 1 is up today. So I want you guys to be able to do that over the weekend. But other than that,